This is a true story, narrated by the owner of the YouTube channel Mr. How Ghost Story. This story is titled The Devil Mother. The first part is titled The Grave Digger, inviting everyone to listen attentively. In late autumn and early winter is a suitable time for burial ceremonies for the departed. It has been over 3 years since we lost a family member, and the day for exhumation has arrived. For the past few days, I noticed some relatives in the house preparing belongings, making calls to the grave diggers to remind them to arrive on time. Although I've heard words like exhumation, transferring remains, and burial, it's quite familiar, but to witness the process firsthand is something I've never experienced before. Being naturally curious and fond of stories about mysteries and the supernatural, I decided to boldly ask an elder in the house, "Is it possible to accompany you to the field to witness the burial?" My uncle turned around and scolded. Burial is not a joking matter, but something to be considered seriously. Also, it depends on whether the age is suitable. It's not just about wanting to go. During this cold weather, it's best to stay home and rest. By 2, 3 in the morning, preparations should already be made, waiting for the arrival of the gravediggers. I felt a bit intimidated by his response, but my aunt spoke up. "Oh, my child, even when he was alive, he cherished his grandchildren. If he wants to go, let him. You're making it too serious. Later on, if his grandchildren want to exhume him, they'll figure out how. This may not be pleasant, but it's necessary. When he sleeps here tomorrow, whenever you wake him up, he'll go." The young man listened with a solemn face. "Fine, but wait for a call to confirm his age over there." "No surplus, but do you remember his age?" I nodded hesitantly, standing by, awaiting the outcome of the conversation. A moment later, he spoke again. "It's all right, but if he goes, remember to carry a garlic bulb in his pocket. Otherwise, if he unexpectedly meets his old friends, it could cause trouble." My aunt added, "Even if he goes, it might bring comfort to his grandchildren. It won't do any harm. Since he's been gone, they've mentioned seeing him lying around several times. It's all about filtering, but do they even know what to eat?" I nodded and smiled. My uncle was talking about my cousin Tony, who passed away 3 years ago. Tony left us at the age of 45. They say it's like losing half of one's life. But Tony never married or had children. He cherished his nieces and nephews dearly when he was alive. It's unclear why he never got married. Perhaps because he didn't have a wife or children. He poured all his affection onto his nieces and nephews, especially me. Whatever was good, he saved it for me. And he often gave me money, so I treasured him a lot too. Just a year before his illness, he fell ill. It seemed like an ordinary illness at first, but then it quickly took his life. Even then, I couldn't believe Tony had passed away. His death came so suddenly. When they brought his coffin down, the grave had already been dug, as fast as that. It was too sudden for me. He had been gone for a week, and I still couldn't believe it was true. During the first week, relatives and friends came to visit, and that day, I heard stories about Tony before his death. My grandmother cried when she heard the elders talk, but they all said Tony met his fate, as if there were unresolved issues that had to be settled before he could depart. Some even said, "It's not like he was decrepit or anything, still much better than that person over there." Yet he couldn't hold on to anyone for more than half a month. Whichever girl he brought home, she would leave within 3 or 4 days. And the poor guy, every time someone mentioned going to see a fortune teller or visiting a temple to cut ties, he'd get agitated and angry. One of the uncles held my grandmother's hand and said, as he was preparing to leave, he said his final words, "My wife is here to fetch me." Hearing those words, I felt even more sorry for him. Fate, curses, and ghosts are damn things, yet they can be so cruel. 3 years have passed just like that, and tomorrow is the day Tony will be buried. Seeing my cousin agree to let me accompany him, I felt both happy and scared. I've watched plenty of horror movies, but I've never seen the bones of the dead with my own eyes. My curiosity made me eagerly anticipate the next day. And then the day arrived. The team of gravediggers, consisting of 5 men, had been present since the previous evening. Everything was prepared, from hats, shirts, horses, rubber boots, red flowers, gold coins. There were so many things that now, looking back, I can't remember them all. It was drizzling that day, but right around 1 a.m., it stopped suddenly. After the ancestral offerings at home, I joined the relatives and the gravediggers in heading to the field where Tony would be buried. The cold of the night was biting, and the desolate field made one's skin crawl even more. Fortunately, there were many people otherwise I wouldn't dare to come here alone. After the rituals and prayers were done, under the dim light, the gravediggers, at the appointed time, began to dig with their shovels, their first strokes. The silent space was only filled with the sound of digging, with the gentle rustle of the wind passing through the surrounding poplar trees. "I see, be careful, we don't want it to break," a voice from the gravediggers team resonated. Watching them work, they seemed very agile and professional. I hurried back to get a closer look, but I couldn't get too close. "Stuck! Stuck!" The sound of the coffin lid being pried open emitted eerie sounds, causing a stir among the gravediggers. One person exclaimed with a somewhat trembling voice, "Has it really been buried for 3 years? Why is the flesh still clinging to the bones like this? I've been in this profession for 30 years, but I've never encountered a case like this." Another person exclaimed in horror, "It's not good. The flesh is still stuck to the bones like this. It's difficult." Some people in my house were stunned by the scene, and some of the elderly almost fainted. A young man asked, "Should we use fire to burn it?" The elderly man, who had been in the profession for 30 years, shouted, "Don't even think about burning it. Don't burn any incense or firewood." "David, go to the car and get my lamps, all 4 of them." David rushed to get the lamps and returned shortly with 4 rather large lamps. The elderly man continued, "These are river lamps. Without these, it won't work. The deceased has committed enough sins. If we use alcohol or gasoline to burn, it'll be even worse. Just leave it to me. Everyone, step away from this place for a while." Afterwards, he instructed the remaining people to place Tony's body on the coffin lid. He then placed the 4 river lamps, already lit, around Tony's body, each about 40 centimeters away from the body. Once done, he turned back to address my family. "Burn the lamps like this until the body decomposes, then we can collect the bones." After saying this, he instructed his team, "Some of you might need to prepare knives. Wherever there's flesh still stuck, use the knives to scrape it off. Cloth, red cloth, and a headscarf should also be prepared. As soon as the body decomposes, act quickly. Finish before dawn breaks, or else we'll have a mess." Luckily, I'm good at planning. Otherwise, it could have been a disaster. Indeed, while at home, I was curious and wanted to watch. But when they brought Tony's body and placed it on the coffin lid, I couldn't bear to look anymore. It took quite a while for Tony's body to decompose. By then, the gravediggers had poured wine over it and delicately removed each bone, placing them on a piece of pre-spread red cloth. The scene was quite gruesome, with some bones still attached to pieces of flesh. Just looking at it made me shiver all over. Yet the gravediggers, armed with knives, gently scraped off any remaining flesh from the bones. Then they carefully washed each bone with wine before placing them on another clean piece of red cloth. At that point, I couldn't watch anymore. It was almost 6 a.m., nearly 4 hours had passed, and everything was finally done. After that experience, it was both my first and last time witnessing a grave digging. During lunch that day, just thinking about it made me lose my appetite. However, when I looked over at the gravediggers' table, I saw them eating and drinking heartily, toasting each other continuously. My uncle also sat there thanking them. Indeed, we were fortunate to have found an experienced and skilled team of gravediggers. If inexperienced hands had been involved today, it could have been a disaster. The team leader, my uncle, chuckled. "Not everyone can do this job, but indeed, this is the first time I've had to spend so much time. Normally, it only takes about 2 to 2.5 hours, but today, dealing with a body still partly covered in flesh like this took a lot of time burning the river lamps. Those lamps are my treasure." Seeing that the story seemed intriguing, I hurried over and sat down beside them, also expressing my gratitude to the gravediggers. I said, "Uncle, today is my first time witnessing this and I'm quite scared." The elderly man chuckled and patted my shoulder saying, "Young man, if you're so easily frightened, what's the use of coming to see the dead being dug up? There are even stories of people who have been dead for years, but still walk around like nothing happened." I was astonished, not believing it, thinking he was just joking. Seeing my disbelief, he chuckled and pointed to the surrounding gravediggers. Just look at their faces. You can tell they don't believe it either. Want to hear the story? This young man might be scared out of his wits after hearing it. The whole team burst into laughter, which annoyed me slightly. I said, "All right, I'll listen. But I don't believe there's any truth to the idea of dead people walking around like nothing happened. That's absurd." Seeing my determination, the elderly man stopped laughing, sat down and said, "All right, today I'll tell you the story of the Devil Mother." The whole table suddenly fell silent, with someone subtly shaking their head, indicating they didn't want him to recount the old story. Nevertheless, the story began with a solemn and eerie tone. Part 1 has concluded. Please remember to subscribe to the channel to watch Part 2. Thank you very much. Goodbye and see you in the next video.